am Tom Brassington. I'm a PhD student at Lancaster University, and I'm here to present to you a short video entitled 5 Things You Need to Know About Blood Brothers. So I'm going to start with a quite obvious point to make, but something that can be forgotten in the context of an English classroom. Blood Brothers is a musical. These musicals are theatrical productions. They happen on the stage, and so it's important to think about Blood Brothers not just as a book you've read in the classroom, but as a performance delivered to an audience. Whilst textual analysis will form the bulk of your approach to this text through close readings of the words on the page, it's important to remember that a lot of these words will be sung. So it's important to bear in mind the musical quality of the songs in addition to the metaphoric and connotative elements of a song's lyrics. Likewise, as a stage production, it is played by actors who are trained to embody characters. Think about facial expressions, how the character moves across the stage, and so on when it comes to analysing this text. Finally, as theatre, much communication is done not just verbally or textually, but visually. So pay attention to how actors are costumed for their roles, how sets are dressed and arranged. These are all aspects of the text which escape the page but are necessary for presenting a comprehensive analysis of Blood Brothers. So building on from that obvious point, musicals tell stories differently. They're different from novels, poetry, and plays, the sort of things you'll be familiar with in the classroom. The narrative conventions are different to these forms. Pay attention to how the musical's plot progresses, how the story is told, and what is being communicated to you at specific moments in the musical. Musicals have scripted lines as well as musical numbers, and they do different things. Often the scripted lines will progress the plot of Blood Brothers, and alongside this the musical numbers more often push certain themes, motifs, and convey characters' emotions. So think about the different things that different aspects of the storytelling are conveying to you as an audience member. So building on this, what is Blood Brothers a musical about? It's a musical about social class in Britain from the 1960s to 80s. Social class as it exists in Britain around the period in which Blood Brothers is set broadly corresponds to a tripartite class system where you have upper class referring to nobility, middle class referring to professionals and office workers, and working class referring to labourers and unskilled workers. Now, this is a huge simplification of Britain's social class structure, but corresponds to what is visible throughout Blood Brothers. The main conflicts and characterizations are between characters representative of the working and middle classes, Mrs. Johnston and Mickey being working class characters and Mrs. Leon and Eddie being middle class. These dividing lines are clearly drawn between the characters, and it's important to consider how their characterization reflects their social class. For example, Mrs. Johnston is superstitious, whereas Mrs. Leon isn't. Mrs. Johnston wears house coats, whereas Mrs. Leon wears fitted white clothes. Mickey is rambunctious and a bit wild, where Eddie is controlled and methodical. So it's important to think about these and other differences between these characters and consider how the text uses those differences in relation to social class. What does the characterization of Mrs. Johnston say about working class women? And what does the characterization of Mrs. Leon say about middle class women, for example? So moving out a little bit further to point 4, Blood Brothers is influenced by economic turbulence in the 1970s as it affected Liverpool. Blood Brothers was first commissioned and produced in Liverpool in 1981 by Merseyside Young People's Theatre Company for secondary school children, before being revised into a full-scale musical. The full-scale musical Blood Brothers opened at the Liverpool Playhouse in 1983. The text production, its writing and commissioning therefore spans an unstable economic period during the 1970s and 80s and the impacts of Thatcherite politics during Margaret Thatcher's premiership from 1979 to 1990. During this period, unemployment rates had been rising in the UK since the mid-1960s when Blood Brothers starts, with an economic recession from 1972 to 5, followed by economic state shakiness for the remainder of the decade. So it's a musical about social class and about economic uncertainty. Because of this context, it's important to note point 5, that Blood Brothers is impacted by conservative policies of the 1980s. This was followed by another recession at the beginning of the 1980s, which Margaret Thatcher sought to manage with economic policies which directly resulted in the closure of many factories, shipyards and coal pits across the country. Now, Liverpool was once a major shipping port in the UK, so it was doubly harmed by changes in shipping practices, such as the rise of shipping containers, which changed how people worked, and Thatcher's policies, which caused huge discontent and massive unemployment and poverty in the area. Her party is historically noted as expressing the notion that Liverpool as a city should be left to a state of managed decline. It should be permitted and organised into poverty, essentially. The impacts of this economic instability and Thatcherism are expressed throughout the musical. The poverty of the Johnstons is a consequence of both, Mickey's subsequent loss of work, a factory closing, and criminal actions are a consequence of Thatcher's conservative policies. By contrast, Eddie's cosy life happens because the economic instability of the 70s was mainly located in industrial and manufacturing sectors, rather than the managerial and administrative sectors in which a middle-class person like Eddie works. So, in all, these things to remember about Blood Brothers concern it as a text and the context of its production and setting. For high-level analysis of musicals, you need to take into consideration aspects other than the purely textual. Bear in mind production, set design, costuming, and musicality. Contextually, think about when the musical was written and produced, and how massive unemployment, economic inequality, and poverty in Liverpool are represented in the text. Alright, thank you for listening and watching this short video on 5 things you need to know about Blood Brothers and reading musicals. Here is a list of further reading which will hopefully provide other useful information should you follow the links, which will hopefully be in the description. Thank you.